All right, so now I start laying in the value and refining my shapes and proportions, double checking my measurements and adding details. Now you can add some value, and then do all your line work, getting those details drawn in, making sure your measurements are right, and then finishing the value. Or you can do all of the line drawing and then add in value. I like to develop them together because one kind of informs the other, especially on human figures, because there really aren't a whole lot of hard line edges. A lot of it is just shadows. Remember when I talked about value way back at the beginning of the school year? Value is what allows us to see surfaces, to understand what surface is closer, where it turns, how it curves, how steep is that curve. We interpret that without having to touch it or walk around it based on how the shadows fall.
So that's why personally I like to develop them together.
Now, once I have it to this point, a great technique to start laying in the value is first to identify your brightest highlight. So a good rule of thumb is that you should have a bright white, that is just the white of the page, and then the darkest black shadow. So that black shadow is definitely here along the edge of her face. Now, I'm not gonna get super dark right up against the edge of her face, because I'm not exactly sure where that should be just yet, like how this line should curve. So I'm gonna leave that a little bit lighter, but over here, I know that this is really dark. So I'm just going to layer in some value. And looking where the edge of her neck is, it's actually like right there. I got the colored photo pulled up on my computer here to look at, because in the printout I lost some of the detail. There's a curve of her scarf coming up here, actually. Something like that. The crease in her neck. I think I actually have this phone a little too tall, which means her neck is too short here. See, this is why we draw lightly to start, because as you start adding in more detail, you will find mistakes. Some things won't line up quite right, and you will have to adjust. Okay, so there is a slight shadow of a crease in her neck here and here. And this is the curve of her shawl, end of her neck. Okay, and this is all. Okay, so that is my darkest dark there, and behind her ear here in her hair, it's creating a real dark shadow. Also right here in her hairline. Okay, now my brightest highlights, I'm going to just very lightly outline them so that I don't shade. So looks like there's either some lights. So I'm going to mark out those areas of light. Now, her face is actually pretty middle gray. There's not a real bright highlight. So I'm actually going, and I think I might exaggerate that a little bit. I might brighten my reference photo here, because I want her face to be the focus of it. So I'm going to mark out the brightest parts of her face and leave them lighter for now. I know that in actuality, in the original photo, they are not the brightest parts. So I've got the highlight along the ridge of her nose, and top of her cheek. Start kind of mapping out her lips a little bit. I'll get more detailed and figure those out more carefully in a little bit. And her chin. So everything else, I'm going to take the side of my pencil and I'm just going to cover all, not pressing very hard, because remember, you can always get darker, but it can be difficult to get lighter. Okay, and now it looks like kind of like we colored it lightly with a crayon. So I want to blend this out so it's real smooth. Now you can use your finger, but it might take a while to do such a large area and you are going to get very dirty. So you can instead get a soft paper towel, or if you have an old t-shirt, you can use it, and you don't have to apply a lot of pressure, smudging the graphite around. And I don't know if you can see it very well in my video here. You can still see through the gray. It's just a very light gray. Okay, so I have a very pale gray over everything, and then my darkest blacks shaded in. I'm going to go ahead and add one more middle gray that's a bit darker. So I know her hair is darker. Now underneath her neck here is a little bit darker, but it's not as dark as that black. This part of her shawl is very dark. Looks like it has a black square on it as part of the pattern. There's actually another one here. Constantly comparing one thing to another. So I just compared her hairline to where this stripe on the scarf starts, and then I noticed that I had where her arm cuts out of the frame was too low, because this stripe was at a bit steeper angle as the scarf moves. And this section of the scarf is very dark. This part's darker, but not as dark. Okay, I kind of lost the definition between her hair and the scarf here, so I'm gonna reiterate that boundary just a little bit for now until I can find out exactly how dark it really is. Now I see there's a slight shadow on her cheek here also, and this side, and this eye is darker. So I have some basic shadows roughed in now, so this gives me a point of reference as I add in more detail. Lips you can usually break into a couple of circles, at least at the center, similar to how we did the nose. So generally there's a small circle or oval there, and then one on either, and then you can use that as kind of a guide. Pay attention to the angle of her mouth. See, if I connect the two corners of her mouth, it's at a slight angle. It's not perfectly flat. So if the bottom of her mouth is there, then the back corner needs to be along that axis, roughly. She has a pretty prominent Cupid's bow. That's what this kind of M shape at the top of the lip is called. Not everyone's lips are shaped like that. So pay attention to the shape of the lips you are drawing. I just made those lips way too small. Look, they should be, one corner should be about even with this imaginary vertical. See right there? And this corner should be not quite to the far eye. Although that makes the right side of her mouth way narrower than the left side, which is not what I am measuring here. So that means I must have this eye too wide, or her nose too narrow. You can always add more grid lines as you need them. Okay, so the width of the right side of her nose it's about half of that. So measure about half. Okay, so her nose is approximately the right size, which means her face must not be accurate. Notice that when I draw these straight lines, I'm turning my paper so that I don't have to move my arm at an awkward angle, and I'm setting my wrist and I'm moving from my shoulder. When I do smaller things, like when I just adjusted the nose, I'm just moving from my hand and my wrist. But larger things, move your whole arm. Okay, so if that's 1/4, half of the half. Yeah, I've got her face too wide because this does not match that. And actually, because of the shadows, the edge of her cheek is right there. Not quite at 1/8. So where's my quarter line? There's my quarter line. Half of that is right there, so that's my 1/8 line. And the edge of her face is about right, actually about right there. So I had her face way too wide. And it does be on the edge of her nose. Also didn't have that curved quite enough. I didn't account for the fact that this blue line and this red line here, there is a gap there, and that gap is going to be larger on my blown up image than on the small thumbnail that I printed. And I had it about the same size. So when you scale things up, everything has to scale up in proportion. So the right side of her right edge was in the right place, but the center of her lip was not in the right place. This is why we developed the whole thing together. I just did some major rearranging. And if I had gotten her nose perfect already, or if I had gotten her mouth perfect right there, and then I realized that some of my measurements were off and I had to erase all of that work, that would have been really frustrating. At this point, I just had to erase some of my gridding and mapping out. That's the bottom of her nose, because we can see a bit of the bottom of her nose. The point is here, but then we can see a little bit of the base. I'm gonna have to pull my digital image up on my computer again because I can't see the detail that I need to be able to see here. And that's my halfway of my page. Some midpoints you want to be careful that you don't lose. The midway point of your page and the center line of the face are usually one of them. That's kind of the point center of her top lip. Then her bottom lip, about like that. Notice that this one I made more circular. And the reason is that this side of her mouth is closer to me, so it's being foreshortened a little bit. That's also why it's at this slight angle, because her head is turned. It's getting further away from us. The left side of her mouth is about half the width of the right side of her mouth. Now things are lining up correctly. Okay, so I've got the shape and size of her mouth just about right. Oh, this bump should be a bit taller than this one. Sometimes you just gotta erase and start fresh. That's better. Okay, going to move on to her eyes. Notice that the ridge of the nose goes into the brow. A lot of the time you can draw it as a consistent line. Let's see, that's my 1/16th line right there. About where my 1/16th intersects with the eye line, about right there. Just to the left of it is where this curve goes. And that's going to guide my shading later. And it's also going to guide my placement of her eyebrow. Just something like that.